The Cross series isn't known for deep storytelling, it's known for its sheer unapologetic brutality. Anyone who's watched my previous videos knows that this universe is overrun by a mysterious plague that turns people into the worst versions of themselves. They're not zombies, they're blood-hungry thrill seekers who torture anything that gets in their way. And honestly, for most survivors in this world, death starts to feel like the more reasonable option. Welcome back to another Crossed video. I know a lot of you have been waiting for more content on the series, and today we're diving into a story from the anthology run Crossed Badlands. This one comes from David Lapham, yeah, the same guy behind the unhinged chaos of Cross Psychopath, and the Yellow Belly arc from Badlands as well. In keeping with his signature style, this story is another blend of gore, shock value, and just edginess. This time we follow a vengeful ex-cop investigating his daughter's death, both before the outbreak and shortly after. It honestly feels like someone dropped the Punisher or Max Payne straight into the Crossed universe, and you'll see exactly what I mean as we get into this video. Before we get into the story of revenge and maybe even redemption, make sure to like and subscribe, and stick around until the end for a very special announcement. Starting off with this disturbing story, we're met with panels of complete darkness. Maybe what's happening is too awful to be shown, but being completely honest, we're already past too awful when it comes to the Crossed. And in this complete darkness, we find out that there is a woman and a man arguing. Or really, it's just a man pressuring a woman into doing something she doesn't want to do. He's trying to calm her down, but she's clearly terrified. When she hesitates, he snaps, saying that there's 15 grand on the line. Overwhelmed, she breaks down crying. We find out that the man has a goon named Omar. Omar tells him that the good stuff has just arrived. The man offers it to the woman, but she still hesitates here. He says it will just help her relax, and if she doesn't want to do this, she can just pay him back. But she can't. She's broke, jobless, and recently kicked out of her apartment. The man does not care. He tells her the only way to pay him back is by starring in adult films, and she's taken aback by this, saying to sell them and if her father ever found out. But the man cuts her off right then and there, saying that he thought she hated her father and that she ran away for a reason. And so after some manipulation and a hit of drugs, the man yells action. It's revealed that the woman here is named Jennifer, and we see her not alive but overdosed on the streets of Los Angeles while a voicemail that she left for her father plays. She calls her father crying, saying she regrets running away to LA and just wants to come home, and it'll be the last time he ever hears her voice. And now fast forwarding a bit into a few days into the apocalypse. Gavin still keeps that voicemail saved on a voice recorder, and he plays it as he's moving through a mansion in the woods, when all of a sudden a crossed man attacks. Gavin barely flinches. With one arm he swings a machete into his shoulder, and with the other he smashes it with a bat. It's clear that Gavin is one of the few competent people in the Crossed universe when it comes to defending himself, not only with firearms but also with melee weapons. But he's not just surviving, he's also on a mission. And just a fair warning that this story does jump a lot from past to present to future, and it does mess with the pacing a little bit. And we even see it right now when we flash back to before the world ended. Gavin being on the ground by two men working for the same group that took his daughter. They tell him that he asked way too many questions and that their boss, a man named Wentz, ordered them to kill him just like they did his daughter. At least while he's getting beaten by these two guys, they have some respect for him, calling him by his last name, Mr. Land. And about my fair warning from earlier about the story jumping back and forth, it does happen one more time. And now we go back to even earlier that night. Gavin had tracked down Wentz's studio pretending to ask about his daughter's movie role. And from the start, it's apparent that Wentz is a very sleazy guy, sporting a very typical douchebag mustache. He claims that Jennifer was supposed to be starring in a comedy, a romantic comedy about a lifeguard and a girl afraid of the water, but her acting wasn't quite there. Wentz continues on with his lie, saying that she was really talented, and if that she wanted to take her acting career seriously, she would have to take some acting classes. All Gavin can do in this moment is just be disappointed and look down, almost accepting that he has no leads. That is until a naked man walks out. Wentz calls to him saying, "Omar, did you just get out of the shower? Well, put on some clothes, dear boy." And from previous knowledge, we know that this is the same Cross that Gavin killed earlier. And Wentz is trying to cover up the fact that this isn't a movie studio at all. It's a trafficking ring. Anyways, showing some kindness, Wentz offers Gavin a place to stay for the night. Gavin refuses, but Wentz insists. "It's the least I can do for a grieving father," he says. And cut to the present, Gavin's back in that same mansion, searching for someone. And lo and behold, he finds him, a man in his boxers. Gavin recognizes the face instantly. It's Donnie, one of the men from the videos. Donnie freezes, stunned. He thought that Gavin was still in jail jail. Gavin tells him flatly, "I was." Donnie panics, babbling on about Omar, saying he saw him eat someone alive. Gavin replies coldly that he killed him. Donnie panics a bit, sweating bullets, says that he's been hiding from Omar for a few days, but Gavin doesn't care. He tells Donnie that he saw the video and that she was 16. Donnie saying he only did what Wentz told him to do. Gavin cuts him off, saying that Wentz was known for hiring underage girls. Gavin gives Donnie one final chance to tell him honestly, and Donnie admits that he knew that Wentz was known for that, but he never asked. And one last question that Gavin has for Donnie: where is Wentz? Donnie breaks down, saying Wentz, Shirley, Soaks, and Martin went to Catalina before everything went to hell. Through tears, Donnie tells Gavin he should understand that compared to the Cross that they're choir boys. Then pathetically, he tries flattering Gavin, saying that he could survive this world, even repopulate it. And while Donnie is saying this, it appears that he likes this idea so much that he even gets off to it. Disgusted, Gavin swings his bat once, splattering Donnie's head against the wall. And now we cut back again, this time to when Gavin had been tied up by Omar and Soaks, the same men who took his daughter. Omar mocks him, saying he'll feel so good on this drug that he could dig up his daughter's corpse and enjoy it. This line pushes Gavin over the edge, where he gains the power to kick himself off the bed of the truck, and he manages to ask the two if they ever laid any hands on his daughter. Omar proudly says that he did, and that they did a lot more than just lay hands on her. Gavin looks horrified, as she had a nickname that Donnie had thought up, Slurpee. And when Gavin hears this, he launches himself off the cliff, and while he's laid flat on the ground after his stumble, he replays Omar's words in his head over and over. And while drugged and delirious, Omar's words continue to echo in his head, and in one of the most darkest moments of the Crossed, which is kind of surprising to say, Gavin actually does what Omar described, digging up his daughter's corpse and doing you know what with it. It is a bit insane that this is included, I don't know why, but who's to question the Crossed universe? And at first you could think that this is a dream sequence, but when he sobers up, he's naked, and he realizes what he's done, stumbling onto the road. It's an absolutely horrifying and just outright disturbing moment, and it's no surprise that this comes from David Lapham, the guy who wrote Cross Psychopath, where the main character is a necrophiliac. And now back to the present. Gavin crosses two names off his list, Omar and Donnie. Only Wentz, Soaks, Shirley, and Martin remain. He walks away from Donnie's corpse, replaying Jennifer's voicemail to remind himself why he's still alive, to avenge her. And while he walks off from the mansion, we see a brutal panel of Los Angeles burning, Crossed rampaging through the city, bodies strung from the signs, gunfire lighting up the sky, and just a whole lot of things to censor. And this issue closes on a haunting note from the past. Gavin and his wife listen to Jennifer's old voicemail one last time as she pleads to come home. Gavin stops the playback halfway through. His wife sheds a tear and Gavin just stares, disappointed, carrying the full weight of his failure. The next issue picks up with Gavin at the docks, taking down a group of Cross completely on his own. They're screaming nonsense as they charge at him, but Gavin cuts them down one after another like it's nothing. When more show up carrying guns, he hops onto a nearby boat and opens fire from a distance. But once the chaos does settle, he finds himself a nice little souvenir, a sombrero that he puts on. It's almost like a comical moment. Gavin, the seasoned survivor, now looking like a cowboy out for revenge. At this point, this might be a sign not to take this story too seriously. And going back to before the outbreak, when Gavin was still tracking down the people responsible for his daughter's death, he visits a grimy adult store, showing the cashier a photo of Jennifer, asking if he's ever seen her, either in person or in any videos. The cashier remains silent for a second. That is until Gavin whips out a gun and tells the cashier that he knows that they deal backdoor in underage videos. And feeling threatened, the cashier tells him to go check out booth 13, thinking that Gavin is just another customer, and tells him that he got the itch and also calls him Pops. And so when Gavin does enter booth 13, he finds a video of Jennifer and Donnie, his worst fears being confirmed. And jumping back to the present, Gavin's boat arrives at Catalina Island, but before he can even dock, a Cross throws a Molotov cocktail, setting his ship ablaze. Gavin dives into the water and swims to shore. He manages to slip past the Cross, who are too distracted by the fire, and now he's determined to find whoever's still alive so he can finish his list. And on the island itself, it's pretty quiet. The neighborhood streets are absolutely empty, but Gavin does strike some luck when he spots a survivor taking shelter in one of the basements. Gavin lets him know that he's not a Crossed, and that he doesn't want any food or any supplies and just some information. He shows the person photos of his targets. The guy says that he's seen the girl and the guy, and makes a pretty pervy comment on how attractive she was. The man explains that many survivors are hiding underground, and that if Gavin keeps asking around, someone will know more. He then asks if he could keep the photo of the girl. Gavin refuses at first, first. But the panel subtly shows the man reaching for it anyway, as Gavin just left the 2 photos for him. And once again, the story does jump around a lot, and this will probably be my last time bringing it up. Anyways, you could tell that Lapham was trying to emulate the non-linear structure that worked so well in his Eisner winner Stray Bullets, almost like Pulp Fiction. But here it's a bit messy and really disrupts the pacing of this story. And as they say, old habits die hard. And in one of these jumps takes us to Gavin's time in prison, something we already know happened, since Donnie mentioned it earlier. A guard tells Gavin that it's time for his first conjugal visit. Confused but compliant, Gavin is led into a trailer still cuffed. And of course, because this is crossed, it's not what it seems. Inside is Martin, one of the people tied to his daughter's death. He tells Gavin that Wentz is still recovering from something, and implies that he's about to do to Gavin what he did to his daughter. It's another shock value moment. Thankfully, we're not shown what happens, but instead what we are shown is back to the present, and it's of a crossed man saying "your ass is mine," while holding up the spine of a detached person like a weapon. And skipping past that, we go back to Gavin, who walks through the ruined neighborhood when he overhears 2 people in a basement. He recognizes the voices. It's Martin and the blonde woman he's been tracking. Surely, Gavin peers through the window, catching them mid-act. They freeze. Martin doesn't recognize him at first, but the woman does. She says it's the guy with the daughter. Martin mocks Gavin here, saying didn't recognize you from the front end, recalling the moment that he had violated Gavin back when he was in prison. Martin also raises a gun at Gavin, but Gavin warns him not to go shooting, or else the cross will come, and first they have some business to do. And he continues to mock Gavin, mocking him for wearing a neck brace after what he did to him at his trial. And before Martin can even realize what's going to happen to him, Shirley pulls out a gun and shoots him, saying that she's been waiting a week to do that. And to no one's surprise, that gets the attention of the crossed. Gavin helps her climb out of the basement, annoyed that she ignored his warning about using a gun. She quickly argues that it didn't matter, that fighting with Martin was bound to bring the crossed anyway. Gavin asks where Wentz is, but she says they'll have to get off the island first, and a horde of crossed charges at them, but conveniently there's a golf cart nearby. Gavin drives through the streets, steering with one hand and shooting with the other. It's really action-packed for a crossed comic, and something that feels like it's out of a video game like Uncharted. As they approach the docks, Gavin tells her to grab a grenade from his coat and throw it ahead. The explosion wipes out the pursuing crossed, launching their golf cart straight into the water. The next panel shows them safe aboard a motorboat, soaked but alive. And as they catch their breath, Shirley finally thanks him and gives him a kiss to thank him. A really passionate kiss. And before shit hit the fan, she was Wentz's secretary, and it's clear she knows more than she's let on. And remember when Wentz offered Gavin a place to stay? I guess this happens shortly after. So Shirley goes to Gavin's room after being sent by Wentz and tries to offer some additional support about Jennifer's disappearance and death, but it appears that she was sent for an entirely different reason: to seduce Gavin, because she'd been ordered to, of course. Wentz's organization planned to film the encounter as blackmail, and they did, knowing Gavin had a wife and son back in Queens. Shirley admits she tried to help Jennifer escape, but by the time she did, Jennifer was already addicted to drugs. Shirley takes a moment to confide in Gavin, saying that she really did try to help her, but by then everything was already too far gone. And now back to the present. It's nighttime and the 2 are talking on the motorboat. She tells Gavin that she wishes he would have just listened to her about staying away from Wentz's organization, but Gavin is more preoccupied on where Wentz is at, and so he asks her. She explains that when reports of the virus first started, that Wentz and his goons had already been on Catalina. Wentz, in a sudden crisis of faith, locked himself in a room for 3 days with the Bible and came out claiming he'd found God. He apologized to her, saying that the meek would inherit the earth and that he would build a safe haven on an island 200 miles off of Baja California, the same island he once used to traffic girls from overseas. Gavin doesn't buy any of it. No amount of religion can wash away what Wentz did. And as Shirley finishes her little story, she tells Gavin that his daughter is gone, the world is gone, and even Wentz is probably dead, but that there's hope in them 2 being alive. But since Shirley's name is still on Gavin's list, her time is up too. Unaware of Gavin pulling out the gun, she looks at the sunrise, saying see, that there's hope for them. But Gavin is the type of guy who doesn't forget, and he raises his gun and fires directly into her skull. He remarks coldly, saying that she should have tried harder to keep Jennifer away from all the bad influences. And as Gavin drives into the sunrise, he makes his way towards Wentz's secret island, somewhere off of Baja California. Who knows, maybe if he goes in that general direction for long enough, he'll somehow magically stumble upon it. We'll find out in the next issue. And in the next issue, before we can find out if he stumbles upon the island, we take another trip back down memory lane to moments after he stepped into the booth from earlier. Gavin completely snaps. After seeing his daughter in one of Wentz's videos with Donnie, everything inside him detonates. He grabs the cashier, slams him to the ground, and demands to know if he's ever heard of Curtis Wentz. The cashier says the producer. Then Gavin, a bit confused, says the producer of what? What does he produce? The cashier explains that he produces videos of pornography, and Gavin here looks a little stunned. He then questions the cashier that if Wentz directed the underage videos in booth 13, and the cashier does confirm this, and then afterwards Gavin just kicks him again and again until the sound spills out into the street. Returning to where we were previously at with Gavin on the boat, he's making his way toward the mainland, and from a distance he spots a struggle break out between the Crossed and some soldiers and also some civilians. It's already a losing battle for the survivors. We see the soldiers in this panel trying their best efforts to keep the survivors safe, but it's almost useless as they're just being torn apart and violated left and right. Two survivors attempt to break away from the carnage. Gavin spots them and offers some covering fire, but it's not enough as one survivor is grabbed from behind and is bitten, and Gavin immediately puts the poor guy out of his misery. The girl barely makes it aboard before a helicopter unleashes a rain of bullets across the sand, mowing down everything that moves. Gavin speeds away with the girl, leaving the wreckage behind. Her name is Haley, and she's 16, the same age his daughter was when she died, and the resemblance does sting Gavin. Before the outbreak, Gavin had been consumed by his mission to bring down Curtis Wentz's trafficking ring. One night on the phone with the contact from law enforcement, it's clear Gavin once wore a badge himself. They talk about the case, how they've tried to pin anything on Wentz but never found evidence that sticks. The two men who attacked Gavin earlier, no leads, no warrants, and to make it worse, they're ready to rule his daughter Jennifer's death as an overdose, with no foul play involved. That's when Gavin decides if the system won't bring justice, he'll do it himself. Almost like a Punisher style story, which makes me wonder, has this author ever written anything related to Marvel? Or possibly even written a Punisher run? Gavin waits outside of a club where Wentz is supposedly at, acting like an overprotective dad. He can't help it, especially after what happened to Jennifer. Every young girl reminds him of her. He warns a few young women in the crowd, asking where their fathers are. One rolls her eyes, saying that's the worst pickup line she's ever heard, and then the bouncer gets involved, telling Gavin to head to the laundromat down the block. But Gavin doesn't leave. There has to be another way. So after doing some reconnaissance through the alley, he slips through a back door, sneaking in unnoticed. Inside, strobe lights pulse across the dance floor. This place is absolutely packed. He spots one of the girls from earlier, chatting with a much older man. Gavin's instincts flare. He storms over, grabs her arm, and pretends to be her father. He yells that she's only 16 and living under his roof, and that she must follow his rules. And something that I think is cool that they've included into this comic is the panel of Gavin wearing a police officer uniform while scolding Jennifer. Well, it's a little bit sad for Gavin, remembering that memory. And I think it's a fun little nod to Punisher's own origin story of his family dying. But in this instance, it's only Gavin's daughter. And now that I think about it, this story is basically if the Punisher met the Crossed universe, even if it's only a slight resemblance to Punisher. But Gavin made a false accusation about the girl's age. She's actually only 22. He apologizes, shaken by how reckless he acted, and he storms off in search of Wentz before the girl can call over the bouncer. And while walking near the VIP area, Gavin sees Wentz. The rage returns. He pushes through a bouncer and opens fire, and things turn ugly pretty fast. The shot draws chaos as one bouncer tries to subdue Gavin, and in the struggle, Gavin's gun goes off. At first, Gavin only shoots a woman who was on top of Wentz, and then secondly, Gavin accidentally shoots into the girl who he had thought was a minor, striking her dead. Gavin pulls a second pistol and fires wildly, dual wielding like a video game protagonist. The main one I think about is Max Payne, obviously, right? Bullets tear through the VIP section. Wentz is hit but escapes with his goons, while Gavin takes a fatal shot and collapses. The last thing he sees is the girl's lifeless body and a crowd screaming for help. And cutting back to the present for one final time in this issue, the sun rises and Gavin is driving the boat, while Haley is barely waking up. She asks Gavin where they're headed to. Gavin tells her that they're going to Mexico to kill a man named Curtis Wentz. Asking if she's ever heard of him, she says no, and that's a good thing. The next issue opens up with Gavin behind bars, paying for the chaos he unleashed in the last issue. From his cell in LA County, he gets back a letter marked return to sender. Instead of writing, his wife Marlene shows up in person, flying in from Queens. Gavin tries to sound calm, telling her that maybe they can transfer his pension to her and their son Gavin Jr. But Marlene isn't here for money, she's furious. She can't believe the man she once loved has ended up where he is currently at, a cop turned criminal, and now their son will grow up without a father. Gavin tries to justify everything, saying he was only fighting for justice for their their daughter, but Marlene cuts him down, saying he's become a monster who spat on his family's memory, and she tells him she won't be coming back. Brutal. And days later, a new letter arrives. This time it's from Wentz, and the tone of his whole entire letter is just disgusting. He brags about being back to making movies, and what he describes isn't fiction, it's a twisted documentary of everything he's done to Gavin's family. Gavin learns that his 10-year-old son was kidnapped by Wentz's men and sold into a trafficking ring. This whole entire part that's going to follow is really brutal and is more twisted than what I think most crossed are capable of. Anyways, Wentz sells his son to a trafficking ring overseas, and his wife, desperate to find him, went to Wentz for help and ended up trapped in the same nightmare as their daughter. Wentz's words are mocking, graphic, and just outright cruel. He writes about how Marlene was blackmailed into working for him, promised she could find her son if she cooperated, a promise that was never real. Gavin's fury boils into pure hatred, and it's shown here in a panel where Gavin is just seething with pure rage. And soon after, Gavin is attacked in the prison showers. He does manage to hold his ground here for a few seconds, but as the group of inmates jump him, likely on Wentz's orders, he's just overwhelmed by their numbers. One eventually drags a rag over his mouth while the others pin him down, and the scene cuts there, implying something else happened to him here. And when Gavin next opens his eyes, he's in the prison infirmary. He rips out the IVs from his arms, and then before we see what happens next, we're pulled back into the present. Gavin and Haley are now on land, somewhere in Baja, California. From his jeep, Gavin spots the lone survivors sprinting from a pack of Crossed. Before Gavin mows down the group of Crossed, he tells them to hit the deck, friend. The survivor immediately yells that those used to be his friends, and that they'd killed dozens of Crossed, but they just kept coming. He says that they're impossible to stop. Also, just a little note here, I know this is the Crossed comic, but the way Haley is depicted here is crazy considering that she's only 16, dude. And what's even crazier is Gavin's luck. How did he come across this jeep? Anyways, Gavin barely listens to the man, focused on his mission. He shows the man a photo of Wentz and asks if he's seen him. The man says yeah, he's seen him, but he goes by the father now, and says that the father is building some kind of sanctuary, that he only takes in women and children and sends them in to fight the Crossed. Gavin scoffs and says yeah, sounds about right. And this story continues to get messier. The comic keeps bouncing between timelines and the flashbacks start piling up like crazy. Like in this moment, between Gavin and Haley, that sort of signals that they have a daughter and father relationship going on between them. On the boat, Gavin tells her to start pulling her own weight. Maybe take the wheel next time so he doesn't fall asleep mid-crossed attack. She laughs it off sarcastically. And for a second, you kind of get like this little redemption story between them going, since he couldn't protect his own daughter. And while we're stuck here in this flashback, while Haley does drive the boat for Gavin, they're being watched by someone who can't believe who he's seeing from his binoculars. It says, oh Jesus, no fucking way. When Gavin and Haley finally reach the area Wentz supposedly runs, the same place that used to house his trafficking operation, they're suddenly surrounded. A convoy of color-coded cars blocks them in, dozens of men with rifles, and then a familiar face steps out. It's Soaks, smirking, greeting Gavin like an old friend. Gavin isn't having any of it. He just tells Soaks flatly that he has a list and that he's on it. Soaks tells him to hell with your list, and Gavin opens up his coat, showing a vest rigged with explosives. But Soaks doesn't flinch. He tells Gavin to look around, to look at the boats. They're helping these people escape. Dozens and dozens of people trying to flee the onslaught of Crossed. And then all of a sudden, Wentz appears, calm, composed, and somehow grateful. He tells Gavin that he couldn't have come at a better time. Gavin instead raises his gun and aims it at Wentz's head, but the area fills with the clicks of dozens more rifles. Wentz raises a hand. If God wills my death, so be it. But first let me give my captain their coordinates for the safety of the women and the children on the island. Gavin lowers the gun slightly, giving Wentz some time to explain himself here, saying that if he gave the captains the coordinates right before they sail, then they stay on the island. No one returns. That way if someone gets turned, they can't find it. Since of course, the Cross retain their memories even after turning. Wentz goes on, explaining that he's found religion, that when the Cross arrived, he saw the end times coming. He's using the old trafficking network to save people now. Last night he claims God gave him a plan, and with Gavin here, he can finally fulfill it. Gavin isn't impressed at all. Nice sermon, he says, but once I'm done with you, the whole world can go to hell. Wentz tells him he doesn't mean that he wouldn't have brought Haley along if he really believed that. Gavin demands to hear the plan, and it's insane. Wentz wants to build a real-life Noah's Ark, but to do that, they'll need to steal the largest cruise ship in the world, the Sea Star, from a naval base in San Diego. It can hold nearly 7,000 people. He says that it's their last chance to preserve humanity. And Wentz finally asks Gavin, what does he think? Can he put his vendetta on hold hold for a week to possibly save humanity. But Gavin doesn't even say anything. Instead, he just shoots Soak's dead, saying, well, that's one name off the list, and it kind of makes things simpler. But before the issue ends, we flash back once again. We finally see why Gavin tore the needle off of the catheter from earlier. He now uses it as a weapon against one of his attackers. He puts the needle in the front end of his shoe, basically like a hidden blade from Assassin's Creed, and stabs the leg of the man, and then elbowing him onto the ground, then beating him unconsciousness before the guards and the other prisoners break it up. Meanwhile, the last piece of Wentz's letter is revealed. He describes how Marlene eventually did find their son, but it was too late. He'd become a street addict in Bangkok, Thailand. Wentz brags that in his new movie, Marlene follows the same path, losing her son to addiction, and herself succumbing to addiction, then taking her own life in despair. And at this point, and I'm sure from before too, the only thing keeping Gavin alive is his rage, which will most likely be one of the main motivators to just keep on going through the apocalypse. When we catch Gavin and Haley in the next issue, Gavin tries persuading Haley to stay behind, while him and Wentz go to San Diego to pull off the biggest heist in the Crossed universe. He tells Haley that the safest place is the island, but she tells him that the safest place for her has always been with Gavin. He doesn't want her anywhere near San Diego. A city that size thrown into chaos with the Crossed would just be a bloodbath. And now it's a bit strange to see Mr. Wentz acting like Ned Flanders, a man that used to thrive in just horrible acts, now acting like a saint. Wentz promises Gavin that if he helps him, he swears to let Gavin kill him afterward. Gavin just stares back and says, when this is all over, you'll be dead all the same. The crew heads out on 2 boats towards San Diego, but of course Haley's not staying behind. She snuck aboard one of them, the one Gavin isn't on. And the men on the boat clearly aren't as devout as Wentz is, and things start to get ugly pretty fast. Just as it looks like they're about to attack her and harass her, Gavin aims his pistol at them. Bizarrely says they're really horny. Wentz steps in, assuring him that the men won't lay a finger on Haley, not because they respect his orders, but because Gavin will kill them and ruin everything. Haley ends up jumping on Gavin's boat, saying she was coming no matter what, and she asks Wentz if they have anything to eat on this cruise. But Gavin demands that they turn this boat around and bring Haley back to the island. Wentz has his priority on getting the cruise ship no matter what, saying that he'll drop Gavin and Haley both off, but they're not turning around. And before they can continue their argument, they've got a whole nother problem coming their way. A flotilla of Cross just doing Cross things, heading towards them and crashing into them. Gunfire breaks out immediately, but it's no use. The Cross rams straight into both boats, turning everything into chaos. Ships being flipped over, gunfire going off, and people just flying all over the place. One of the Cross emerges from the water and lunges at Haley. Gavin makes quick work of that Cross, decapitating him in an instant, while the Cross decapitated head is stuck in a smile. But for the crew aboard Wentz's boats, it's already too late. One of the men near Gavin and Haley is bitten in the foot and quickly turns Crossed. And just as Gavin and Haley are about to be attacked, the boat crashes, throwing everyone on board onto shore. And on shore, Gavin sees the same Crossed man eating another person. Gavin fires his gun at him, but quickly runs out of bullets. And being the fast thinker that Gavin is, he quickly resorts to his blade, decapitating the Crossed, while his head continues to spew some profanities. And Haley somehow survived too. Gavin tells her to get up, and that there's no special treatment now. They're back on the mainland now, and the real threat's only beginning. He regroups with Wentz and the remaining survivors, and already the plan's gone off the rails. But Wentz still has faith in Gavin, calling him humanity's last hope. The brief calm doesn't last long. More Crossed can be seen in the distance, heading straight for shore. And aboard their ship, they're just getting into it. That's the only way I can think of saying it. But before we find out what happens, we cut to a flashback. Back in state prison, Gavin made his reputation clear. He wasn't anyone to mess with. But there's more to it. 10 hours earlier, the warden had pulled Gavin aside for a talk. He reviewed Gavin's past, the failed mission that killed innocents in the club, his family cutting him off, and warned him to behave. But Gavin had a counteroffer: 10 years of peace in the prison if the warden backed his parole. The warden agreed, making Gavin his unofficial enforcer. And I mentioned previously that the story is a bit of a mess, and here we get another example of it. Back to the present, the story somehow just forgets about the Crossed on the boats. Now Gavin's killed the last 2 surviving crew members, who went sitting on the ground, devastated, saying one of those men was their only pilot. For once, Wentz actually shows remorse, telling Haley that Gavin's rage isn't unfounded, it's all his fault. Wentz had tortured and murdered Gavin's family. And now the bizarre trio, Gavin, Wentz, and Haley, watch from a vantage point over San Diego's football stadium. And yes, it's still the Chargers stadium. This comic came out before they moved to LA, which honestly threw me off. Wentz talks about redemption, realizing how foolish his dream of salvation was. But of course, the real highlight of this panel isn't the dialogue. That's what we're shown. We see the apocalypse unfold on a massive scale, the last military forces desperately holding the line, boxed in against an unstoppable tide of Crossed. Gavin, ever pragmatic, points out that the soldiers are using the hills to trap the Crossed, retreating toward the city while covering evacuations. And honestly, I really love seeing the Crossed universe showing military operations while the world is unfolding into chaos. I think it's a really interesting concept, and seeing it in this story was a surprise to me when I first read it, because after reading so much Crossed content, you start to wonder how the rest of the world is looking, and how did the US military hold out against the Crossed, and we're shown it in this story. But as we know from other Crossed stories and now, no one was ready for the Crossed outbreak to happen, and amid the chaos, Gavin sees an opportunity. They can use the madness to sneak in with the evacuations and reach the harbor and find the cruise ship. And Wentz starts to crumble again, saying that the religion he found was a facade, and he's a human after all. But Gavin shoots back that neither of them really are. The only difference is that Gavin used to be. And on the streets below, the city's a war zone. Gunfire, explosions, soldiers dragging each other to safety. As Gavin and Haley fight their way through, Wentz is ambushed by a Crossed woman, but one clean headshot from Gavin takes her down. Wentz thanks him, but Gavin makes it clear when the mission's over he's killing him. Wentz, clinging to faith again, says he won't falter this time. Gavin tells them to take the uniforms off dead soldiers to blend in with the evacuation. Wentz quips, nothing shakes him, does it? Haley just says nope. Before the issue ends, we flash back again. Gavin passes unopened letters from Wentz to his cellmate, saying add it to the pile. His cellmate asks if he's ever curious to what's inside of them, but Gavin says not as curious as the man who wants me to open them. And his cellmate begins talking about prison politics, when all of a sudden someone rushes in, shouting in that the warden's coming, and he's gone mad, bashing in heads. Everyone at this point is unaware of the horror that is about to follow. When Gavin sees the warden, he realizes that he's become insane. The warden's become one of the Crossed, and that their deal is off. And it looks like it's finally time for a prison break. And before we continue the story into the next issue, I want to take a quick second to talk about one of the variant art for this cover's issue. In all of its glorious brutality, it's honestly just really cool seeing a city that I've been to and have driven on the same highway that's being featured here, reimagined with soldiers fighting Crossed. And another reason I like it is because it has to do with what's actually happening in the story. The military making one last effort to evacuate survivors and civilians, giving us another brutal glimpse into this twisted world. And now the streets of San Diego are completely overrun. A horde of Crossed charges head on towards a line of soldiers holding a defense. Most notably is a firefighter Crossed who lunges at a soldier. The soldier does manage to take him out, but by then it's already too late. Blood is spewing from the Crossed onto the soldier, infecting him. A sergeant looks over to his fallen comrade and says sorry son, and then takes him out. At this moment the sergeant finds out how the Crossed infection spreads through blood and other bodily fluids. He yells to his fellow soldiers to not let them touch you. Afterwards all hell breaks loose, tanks fire, and we get a panel of just the chaos. The military wasn't prepared for this at all. No hazmat gear, no protection, just soldiers dying and turning in seconds. Meanwhile, Gavin, Wentz, and Haley sneak in and join the evacuation effort, now wearing military helmets instead of full uniforms like they planned. Maybe there was some miscommunication between the writing and the art department. Maybe the helmets will be enough to pass as soldiers. But then we cut back in time to the moment the state prison descended into hell. The warden and staff, now Crossed, are tearing through inmates. Gavin's cellmate is caught off guard and is bitten by one of the staff after the Crossed makes a really offhand comment, and soon after turns Crossed, asking for someone to suck him off. Gavin turns to the man who came to warn him earlier, Hector. Hector tells him that they gotta run, man, and get out of there. But Gavin and Hector are in complete shock, seeing people that they lived with in prison, and even the warden do just vile acts, getting really freaky. They find a small group of survivors holed up with makeshift weapons such as pipes, shivs, and whatever you would find in prison. Gavin warns them that the scars are the giveaway, and that any contact with any bodily fluids is death. The men realizing since they can't get close that they're gonna need some guns. Back in San Diego, the evacuation convoy moves along the interstate, hoping to reach the city before nightfall. Wentz starts talking about their plans, stealing the Navy's largest cruise ship, but Haley spots something horrifying. Off the highway, Crossed are moving in massive numbers, creeping in like insects, drawn to the convoy like a tidal wave of bodies. Gavin tells her to stay close, even if she has to dig her nails into his arm. They open fire as Crossed flood onto the road. A helicopter rains bullets from above, wiping out a huge cluster of them, but it's not enough. A tank even gets overwhelmed, Crossed climbing over it like ants. Haley almost gets grabbed, but Gavin cuts the Crossed down in one smooth swing. She fires back at a group of Crossed dressed like Catholic students, joking, "I went to Catholic school," while cursing at them. But there's no time for any sort of trauma dumping, as the tank that's infested with Crossed fires near the trio, sending them launching. When Gavin regains consciousness, he immediately points his weapon at Wentz, who tells him Haley's missing. The explosion reminds Gavin of another one, back at the prison, after the armory blasted open. He tells the surviving inmates to take whatever guns and ammo they could, and that the only way they're going to get out of here is through the most direct way, which is the fence. So Gavin and his group of inmates go to a watchtower, and from above they watch below, seeing survivors and Cross scramble over each other, while the fence collapses from the amount of survivors trying to escape. And just then Hector is shot in the leg by a Crossed officer, and instead of helping, Gavin just shoots at the other cellmate that he helped escape. It seems that he is determined to get revenge first and foremost, even if that means sacrificing his fellow people that he served time with. And the strangest thing about this whole entire story, if I hadn't already said that before, is that this is never touched on again. What did Gavin mean by doing this? I'll just stick with my fan theory or whatever, that Gavin was secretly waiting for a chance to kill these people because of a crime they committed. Or maybe he was just buying himself some time to escape. The good old Shane Walsh method. Anyways, not dwelling too much on the past, we go back to the present. Gavin and Wentz search desperately for Haley, joining up with the squad of soldiers regrouping off the highway. Their commander rallies everyone. There's a new defensive line being set up off Broadway in the harbor. Massive artillery is waiting there, their last shot at wiping out the Crossed and saving the 250,000 evacuees still alive. But they'll need 50 men to hold this line, 50 men who accept the fact that they're not coming back and are ready to sacrifice themselves. Oh yeah, and how can I not mention the fact that this guy has a very unique accessory to his gun, and that is of course the head of a Crossed. This guy obviously is getting very well adjusted to the new world, and after that guy gives a speech, Gavin storms off. He's done waiting. His only goal now is reaching Wentz's so-called Noah's Ark project and finishing the job so he can finally kill him. In his mind, Haley's already gone, dead, or even worse, but Wentz stops him, telling Gavin that he doesn't know that. But Gavin says that if Wentz wants to go ahead and do his whole entire plan about saving families and getting the cruise ship, well, it's right there, follow the leader to it. But Wentz tries to persuade Gavin into staying and searching for Haley, saying that God sent Gavin to him and that God sent Haley to Gavin, so he can't just say oh well and walk away from this. Their argument is cut short when the sergeant calls everyone in. Staying behind is voluntary, he says, and that any man who stays will have his undying respect. But make no mistake that they're going to die here, protecting the evacuation efforts. Gavin hesitates and then says damn you Wentz as he stays, not for faith, not for redemption, but maybe for the smallest chance that Haley's still out there. Wentz meanwhile believes this is his moment to save lives, maybe even his soul, for both of them. This last stand might be the closest thing to peace they'll ever get. In the next issue, we're back on the ground. Gavin and Wentz have joined up with the last line of defense. They're huddled behind a house while unspeakable horrors can be heard from the outside. The sergeant leading the operation hesitates, unsure whether to intervene or not. Gavin, being practical once again, says they're better off saving their strength for the fight outside, but when suddenly finding religion again, delivers this whole entire speech about how God didn't put them on this earth just to survive. It's about what they do with the time that they're given. Somehow this fires the sergeant up, and he decides to breach the house with the soldiers. And inside, it's a nightmare. No survivors of any non-crossed. Everyone is already turned. Just blood, limbs, and even a crossed baby being tossed in the air while intestines hang from the ceiling fan. And in the center of it all, just two crossed getting it on, lathering each other with whatever body fluids. All the sergeant can do is just look in horror and say sweet Jesus while aiming his very fashionable rifle before tossing in a grenade and leveling the whole entire house. Gavin brings to the sergeant's attention that that was just a big mistake, that an explosion like that is going to overrun the area in a few seconds. And to no one's surprise, of course, the crossed come, in both ways meaning. Still, after what they've seen, the sergeant's had enough. He rallies his men, shouting that they all knew that this was going to be a suicide mission. So would they rather go down being violated by the crossed or go down fighting? The soldiers line up, bracing for all hell to break loose, and open fire as the crossed rush toward them. And from above, the city's on fire. Helicopters cut through black smoke, and the apocalypse has officially arrived. After the firefight subsides, the sergeant lays out a map, drawing the last line of defense, announcing that they've only got 2 hours before all of this is leveled. The plan is to split up, sweep houses for survivors, and keep the last line clear, and at 22:30, regroup before the bombs drop. And then finally, they'll run like hell, and hope that somebody makes it back to tell the tale. Before Gavin has the chance to talk to Wentz and pull him aside, the sergeant calls both of them, telling them that they're with him. And the first house they search catches the scene of a group of crossed, caught mid-BDSM act. The trio makes quick work of these crossed, I assume, assume the real reason why the sergeant had called them over. He knows that they're not his men, and he asks who they really are. And a little side note, there's a funny little editing error here, where the speech bubble is clearly coming from the wrong person, Wentz. Also, I do have to say, I wonder what made the sergeant think that these two men weren't his soldiers. Was it the chance that they weren't wearing uniforms? I certainly think it is. Wentz actually tells the truth for both of them, that he's a pornographer and Gavin's a convict, and that they're only here to steal a cruise ship and save a few thousand people. The sergeant doesn't even blink. He says they could be the worst people alive and he wouldn't care. Nothing compares to what the crossed have done. Then he cracks a joke, asking if they should be wearing crosses or splashing holy water on them. Gavin just says, don't let them touch you, and that they die like anything else. And while patrolling the neighborhood, they spot a few survivors. The sergeant yells that it's their last chance to get to safety, and the survivors run. One nearly gets grabbed by a cross, but the trio saves them just in time. Things quiet down until they hear the screams of a young woman. Thinking it's Haley, Gavin and Wentz rush in, but it's not Haley, it's worse. The whole entire house is filled with gore, cut off heads in the sink, mutilated torsos in the doorframe, just absolutely covered in blood and guts. And then at the dining table there's a crossed girl cursing at her father's corpse while eating his intestines. Gavin ends it quick with his blade. Then a terrified woman steps out from hiding. She's been holed up here with 6 kids. Wentz reassures her that there are soldiers outside who will get them to safety, which honestly, this whole entire thing of Wentz telling people that they'll be safe is a bit ironic and mildly funny. You know, considering his actions and crimes that occurred prior to the apocalypse. Once the family is gone, Gavin tells Wentz to close the door to confront the worst thing that he's ever done to his wife. And Wentz doesn't hold back. He says he kept her locked up, tortured her, fed her heroin, and let his men keep her company. He says he's not trying to hide that he was a monster, and Gavin immediately slices his nose, correcting him, not was. Gavin tells Wentz to go on, and he tells Gavin how he once brought his wife to his main house, promising to tell her where her son was, the boys she'd been forced to live for. But when she asked, he screamed at her, grabbed her hair, and had his men torture her as punishment. Later, when she begged again, he told her he'd shot her son in the face, and then forced her to do something unspeakable on camera. Wentz says that broke her completely, and the worst part, he didn't actually kill the boy, he just headed to crush her. Just classic old manipulation. He tries to apologize, but Gavin just stacks him. Wentz, blood pouring from his nose, says, "You wanted to know." Gavin coldly replies, "And you goddamn told me." When they step outside, the sergeant asks what happened to Gavin's friend. Gavin says he ran into a doorknob. The sergeant just tells them whatever they have going on, to save it until after the bombs drop. Then they can, quote, ass fuck each other to their heart's delight. Gavin just says yes sir, but the sergeant, already accepting the fact that he's not going to make it out alive, says, "I mean, what the will I care? I'll be dead anyway." Then Wentz drops a bombshell, figuratively this time. He tells Gavin that some soldiers saw a girl matching Haley's description being pulled back during the retreat. She might still be alive, but Gavin's done holding on to hope. He says they should just stick to the plan and get the cruise ship. As Wentz tries to stop him, Gavin finally pulls his gun out, saying that their deal is over. But Wentz blurts out one last thing: Gavin will never find his wife and son. Gavin freezes. Wentz explains that they might not actually be dead, or they might be. Who's really safe in a world filled with crossed anyway? But he explains when Gavin stopped answering his letters from prison, Wentz hid them away, kept them on the island as leverage. If Gavin keeps them alive and finishes the mission, he'll be reunited with them. And that's where this issue ends. What a cliffhanger, am I right? The next issue opens up grimly. A family of survivors hear soldiers kicking down their door. Maybe it'll be safety, right? But when they take a closer look, they see the crossed rash carved across the soldiers' faces. Whatever comes next isn't shown, just the mother's scream, not the kids, echoing through the house. Moments later, the real soldiers arrive, just in time to mow down the imposters who'd already turned. Among them are Gavin and Wentz, still searching desperately for Haley. They go house to house, mistaking several crossed women for her, but it's no use. Haley's still nowhere to be found, and just then the sergeant makes an announcement that time's up, and now it's time to run like the devil. Jets fly overhead, lighting up everything in sight. Everyone makes a break for it as bombs rain down, hoping to outrun the firestorm. In the chaos, Gavin spots a woman who looks exactly like Haley. Before he can reach her, an explosion nearly tears her apart, but somehow she keeps on running. Gavin recklessly runs after her. Wentz tells him not to do it, that it's too late. And as Gavin runs, moving past explosions and quickly shooting down a cross, he runs near a shed, yelling, "Haley, it's Gavin," and that they have have to go, that this whole entire place is about to be leveled very soon. And inside the shed, he finds the woman to be already turned, as she raises a pair of shears to decapitate herself. An explosion blows the place apart. Gavin's thrown outside, and just as the crossed woman lunges at him, Wentz saves him with a burst of gunfire. It wasn't Haley, but she was wearing Haley's clothes, although there is a bit of a continuity hiccup here. Before Haley was separated from Gavin and Wentz by the explosion, she was wearing a pink top, and here in this issue, she's wearing a white top. I thought I was going insane at first, but it turns out it's just a little error. The bombing of San Diego has lasted all day. By nightfall, it has finally stopped. Gavin and Wentz find themselves among a crowd of other refugees. Wentz tries to tell Gavin that he did everything he could to try to find Haley, but Gavin doesn't want any sympathy, especially not from the man who once destroyed his family. It's one of the craziest dynamics in this whole entire comic. Two men with a bloody shared past now forced to rely on each other at the end of the world, especially when you just take in the amount of heinous stuff that Wentz did to Gavin. But Gavin's only doing this for one real reason, so at the very end, he can kill Wentz. And now it's time for the final step in this whole entire mission. Now they've got to figure out how to steal the world's largest cruise ship and fast. Gavin questions a corporal about the evacuation, but even the soldiers don't have any answers. But rumor does have it that the Navy is sending in carriers and battleships from Hawaii to help with the evacuation. But for now, the only thing that is confirmed is that women and children are going first. If you're wearing a uniform or a flag, you're staying behind. Realizing time's running out, Gavin and Wentz push through the panicked crowd. Wentz theorizes about how to hijack the ship, but Gavin's done listening. Acting very rash, he chokes out a soldier on top of a tank, threatening the rest inside with a grenade and seizes control. Gavin is a man of action, and Gavin yells to the crowd of people that there's an emergency and for them all to move out of the way. And at the last line of defense, guarding all the cruise ships, the sergeant and his men are already fighting off a new wave of Crossed. Before the Crossed make contact with the sergeant and his men, he tells his fellow soldiers to be kind to their brothers and to give the Crossed hell. And Gavin, being the clever man that he is, uses this whole entire conflict to his benefit, or really just to do Wentz's mission. They use the tank as cover to plow through the last line of defense and go straight to where the cruise ships are at. The soldiers are calling out saying yo 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 and halt or what the hell are you doing? But Gavin has his priorities straight, and Gavin and Wentz managed to successfully pull off this stunt. And the soldiers didn't even suspect that there was even anyone on top of the tank or even operating it. Maybe this was a ghost tank. And fast forwarding a bit in the comic, once on the deck, Gavin storms the cockpit. The captain's mid a call with the command, talking about waiting for the fleet to arrive, but Gavin cuts him off. There's no time, and that they need to move now. The crew hesitates until a voice cuts through the tension. It's Haley, still alive and wrapped in a bathrobe. She steps outside and cliche-ishly says, I was wondering when you two idiots were going to show up. And now for the final issue. Gavin's threat worked somehow. The crew obeys and he orders the captain to keep the ship moving. No slowing down for anything. The captain shoots back, asking, or you'll shoot me? Gavin says if the ship stops, everyone on board dies. Because the Crossed aren't just on land anymore, they're in the water too. Back on shore, the last of the soldiers are overrun. The Crossed have nothing left standing between them and the evacuation ships. Gavin hands Haley his gun and tells her that if the captain doesn't do as he's told, she knows what to do. Gavin and Wentz step out of the cockpit. To get a grasp of what they're dealing with, Gavin pulls aside a soldier, asking him what kind of weapons do they have on board and how many soldiers are there. The soldier says it's just him and 7 others, making this whole entire takeover much more easier, and that there is an ordnance room, but it's not well stocked, and everything was sent to the front. Gavin orders the soldier to grab whatever guns he can, and to find any passengers that can shoot, and for them to get ready to defend themselves, because if even one of the Crossed get on board, everyone is done for. And what about the Navy fleet and the other refugees that we previously saw? Well, the Navy fleet that was supposed to rescue everyone is falling apart. Crossed are boarding battleships, helicopters are firing into their own vessels, and command seems to have decided that anything compromised is better off destroyed. San Diego, once a glimmer of hope, is now completely lost. Crossed tearing through what's left of the army as missiles rain down. Wentz remarks that they're eating themselves now. You know, I'm sure that this is supposed to be a serious moment and all, but I can't help not to call out what exactly is going on in the background of this panel. Maybe once again this was an error within the writing department or whatever. The passengers seem to be absolutely filled with glee while they're holding up firearms. Maybe this was supposed supposed to be a depiction of crossed, and somehow the artist forgot to insert the cross-shaped rashes. But all I know is that if I was in this situation and the whole entire world was falling apart around me, I would not be smiling one bit. And if the cross were to exist, I would stick one of those firearms in my mouth. And moving along, Gavin orders the captain to keep the ship moving before the chaos reaches them too. And what's left of the military is shown in this haunting panel. Back on the mainland of San Diego, helicopters are crashed, tanks are overrun, people are being attacked and hanged by the crossed. It's just absolute carnage, showing the brutal aftermath of a crossed rampage. And there is one lone soldier left, holding a cross in one hand, while in the other he has a pistol to his own head, a bleak representation of what little hope is left after a world overrun by crossed. Luckily for our trio of crazy characters, especially the Violents, they have successfully made it out to open seas on the cruise ship. Later that night, we finally see what happened to Haley after the explosion that separated her from Gavin and Wentz. A soldier named Justin carried her to safety until they were ambushed by crossed, bursting out of every imaginable crevice. Justin ran, Haley clinging to his back, until a cross grabbed his leg and sent them both crashing to the ground. Justin was stabbed, blood was everywhere, and Haley, terrified of infection, tore off her clothes and hid in a garbage can, which possibly explains how that one crossed woman got her clothes. And when it was quiet, she crawled out and made her way back toward the military lines. She was certain that Gavin would survive, and Wentz tells her if anyone could make it through this, it'd be him, and as long as she stayed with Gavin, she'd be safe. And now that they've made it, it's time for Wentz to hold up his end of the bargain. He had already given the captain coordinates to the island where there is sanctuary, and where he claims Gavin's wife and son are being kept. Gavin tells him to come on then, it's time to die. Haley, watching him, grabs Wentz's hand, looking genuinely terrified. It's kind of a twisted detail considering what Wentz was before all of this, that he somehow captivated the sympathy from Haley, and somehow he's managed to manipulate things so well that even Haley seems to be afraid to lose him. Wentz assures her that everything is going to be fine as he and Gavin head into the cabin for one last talk. And once inside, Wentz tells Gavin that he kept his word, and whatever he has planned for him, he's at peace with it. Gavin, not the type of man to get all sentimental over this departure, just tells him to shut up and demands to know about his wife and son. Wentz tells him that he wasn't lying, that they're there on the island, and that he sent word to his men to free them and treat them well. And immediately Gavin just hits him, rightfully so, as Wentz knows that his death is not going to be exactly peaceful. He says that this is not going to be fun, and attempts to tell Gavin something that he had his men do with the heroin. But before Wentz can spew whatever nonsense he has about the heroin, Gavin just hits him, sending him to the floor. And while Gavin breaks Wentz's arm, Wentz attempts to call to Jesus to give him strength, but Gavin just tells him, "Don't you condescend to me, you piece of shit." And after a little bit of torture, Wentz reverts back to his old vile self, the monster who once took pleasure in torturing Gavin's family. He admits it, smirking through the blood. He tells Gavin he enjoyed every second of it. And all that can be seen or heard is Wentz's screaming coming from the cruise ship. Moments later, Haley asks if Gavin feels better. He tells her no, but it had to be done. She insists that Wentz changed, that he's not the man who he once was. Gavin tells her that she's fallen for Wentz's manipulation just like everyone else did, and that his daughter would have said the same thing. And then in one brutal panel, we see it. Gavin delivering the final blow that ends Wentz once and for all. And now all that's left is the island. And you know, just a fair warning before we get into the final segment of this entire story, you'll notice that this exact resolution or ending feels a little bit rushed, leaving a lot of questions unanswered. And still to this day, I don't know what the ending is supposed to represent. Hopefully you'll catch my drift as we get into seeing what exactly is on this island. When the cruise ship reaches Wentz's coordinates, the island is a complete ghost town. Everything looks way too calm. One of the soldiers remarks, "Where are the people? Why isn't there anyone waving or greeting?" For all that the people on the island can know, maybe that they're crossed, Haley says. She asks how many people were on the island. Gavin says that there were 2,000 or 3,000 at least. The captain is ready to give up. They've circled the thing for a few times now, and that they could just move on. But Gavin needs his answers, whether his family is alive or not, and that he's going ashore no matter what. He tells the captain to keep watch, and that if anything that looks crossed hits the water, that they go, even if that means leaving Gavin behind. The captain just tells him that they'll move out and then come back around in the morning. And against Gavin's wishes, Haley follows him, because they've made it this far together, so why not? They gotta see this through to the end. And once on the island, it's even more eerily quiet. Haley suggests to Gavin that maybe they should just call out for his wife and kid. Gavin just says no and to stay close. And as they walk, they find heroin needles scattered across the ground. Then inside a set of shipping containers, they discover a corpse, a crossed man with a dozen needles jammed into his neck. Gavin remarks that they found the island, and upon further inspection, inside a package is even more heroin. And not only that, but a barrel full of cyanide. Gavin says son of a bitch knew they'd go for it. Before they can fully grasp the situation, Gavin hears something above him. Haley says that it's a hum, maybe it's an airplane. And Gavin just tells her to put on some protective equipment that they found. They'll have to go even further into the island to get some sort of answer to what exactly happened here. And after coming across a disturbing scene of crossed corpses, all with heroin needles stabbed in them, Gavin comes to a realization of his own, that Wentz was right, or Wentz had something planned. Wentz poisoned the heroin, figuring if the crossed came, which they did, they would find it and have a party. Gavin admits that he was a goddamn animal, but at least he tried something. Gavin tells Haley to go back to the boat. Haley refuses, telling Gavin that he'll die, that one of the crossed are bound to be alive, or even worse, that Gavin will somehow get infected if one of the flies land on him. And she admits that she'll never make it to the end on her own, and that she needs Gavin, that he saved her. And after this really close moment between the two, Gavin just tells her to stay put, and that he'll be back. Then he turns toward the center of the island, walking into the haze of death and buzzing flies to find out, once and for all, if his family survived. And that's where the story abruptly ends. What the heck, man. And now that we're done with the story, I guess the big elephant in the room to talk about is that ending. Up until that point, I thought that Gavin was an ordinary human, not a lump of flies that disperses the further he went into the island. Did I miss something in the story? Was this supposed to be some sort of M. Night Shyamalan twist? I mean, if you look at that panel, that's what it obviously looks like. But the ending is one of my many gripes that I have with this story. And now to go over some of the other gripes that I do have with this story. But I will admit, the premise was pretty interesting at first. You have this ex-cop who's very reminiscent of characters like Max Payne or even the Punisher. And he's not some average Joe, he's pretty much a badass. I mean, we see him dual wielding pistols at the club, which is honestly something I never expected to see in a Cross story until this one. And even after the Cross outbreak, we see him handle himself pretty well, handling weapons like machetes, bats, pistols, and any firearm, even operating a tank to some extent. But one of the biggest mistakes that I think that Lapham did was drugging Gavin, and Gavin under the influence desecrating his daughter's corpse. What I imagine Lapham was thinking in that moment was like, hey, you want to see something fucked up? But I'm sure you can't even call it a mistake, because that was Lapham's intention writing the story, coming up with the most imaginable stuff, like what he did with Gavin's son, making Wentz kidnap his son, and then selling him into a trafficking ring all the way in Thailand, and then getting him addicted to drugs, and then essentially almost doing the same thing to his wife. I mean, the story would have benefited without all of this stuff, and like I said earlier, the premise was pretty solid, but then you remind yourself that this is the same guy who wrote Cross Psychopath, where one of the main gimmicks of the protagonist is necrophilia, and ripping off people's skin like Ed Gein. But I think one of the most craziest things that Lapham did try to pull off was making Wentz a likable character. I mean, we saw him previously and after the apocalypse, and they're almost like two completely different people, but Wentz really is a horrible man, and when you see him act like all religious and high and mighty like Ned Flanders, you kind of feel grossed out considering what he did to other countless young women and Jennifer, Gavin's daughter. And I feel like Lapham did try to do something interesting with that whole entire concept, when Haley at the end kind of feels bad for Wentz's death, and Gavin just tells her, oh, my daughter would have felt the same way. But then you remember what Wentz did, and you're like, holy shit, dude, this guy was horrible. I can't believe Gavin kept him alive for so long. And one of the main things that I did like was the whole entire spectacle of San Diego, and seeing the military fight the Cross before all things are completely hopeless. One of the funniest things to mention was Gavin, Wentz's, and Haley's disguise. I know in the story that Gavin was like, hey, let's steal some uniforms from dead soldiers, but afterwards they're only wearing military helmets and they somehow managed to sneak in. I don't know, I just think it's pretty funny. And what's even funnier is the little detail errors that are shown in the comic. You have a speech bubble coming from someone that's not even saying what they're supposed to be saying, and some inconsistencies with the outfits that they have on. You can tell that the story is very rushed, both in art and as well the writing, rushing to get the story over with, leaving us with this unsatisfied taste in our mouth. But hey man, it's a Crossed comic. You're not here for storytelling, are you? And if you are here for storytelling, there is one Crossed comic that I can't wait to cover. It is taking me forever to make because I want to make sure it's absolutely perfect. I want to put a lot more editing into it, and I also want to get a new mic because this one is getting pretty stale on me, if you couldn't tell already. And of course, that comic is none other than Cross Wish You Were Here, a webcomic. And it is a pretty lengthy comic, so the editing and just voice recording will take a while for that one. But I promise it'll be worth it, because if I'm being honest, that is one of my favorite pieces that come from the Cross universe. And the other special announcement that I have, before I go on for way too long, is that it's giveaway time. I'll be putting a word somewhere around here. And so the easiest way I thought I would do this giveaway was to make a Google Forms. All you have to do is answer the question and leave your PayPal, and and I will send you $25. So hey, if you made it this far, thank you. And I really just want to show my gratitude to all my viewers who have been checking out my videos, because I honestly never thought that I would get this much views ever in my whole entire life, so I'm very thankful for that. Goodbye.
I need someone to help me, I'm living in hell. I wish I was more healthy and I help myself. I need someone around me, I want